Hey everyone! Tonight we're exploring the ancient Egyptian grain reserve system and how Pharaonic civilization prepared for times of scarcity. Before we settle in, take a moment to like this if you enjoy these peaceful historical journeys, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love how our global community comes together to explore these fascinating questions about human ingenuity. Now get comfortable, dim those lights. Tonight, we're not chasing dramatic tales of conquest or crisis. Instead, we're going to examine something much quieter but equally profound: the sophisticated systems ancient Egyptians developed to ensure abundance even during lean years. Let's begin our gentle journey into the world of pharaonic granaries and the sacred economics of preparation. Picture, if you will, the pre-dawn stillness along the Nile, where massive limestone granaries stand sentinel against the desert sky. In these quiet hours, scribes move by the lamplight through corridors lined with stored grain, their reed pens scratching softly against papyrus as they record the abundance that will sustain entire communities through whatever uncertainties lie ahead. This is the world we're entering tonight, a realm where practical necessity and spiritual obligation merged to create one of history's most sophisticated disaster preparedness systems. The ancient Egyptians understood something profound about the relationship between abundance and security. Their grain reserves weren't merely storage facilities. They were expressions of cosmic order, manifestations of the pharaoh's divine responsibility to ensure his people's survival. Tonight, we'll explore how this civilization transformed the simple act of storing grain into a complex institution that balanced religious duty with economic necessity, creating networks of distribution that could respond to crisis with remarkable efficiency. As we journey through moonlit granaries and sun-warmed storage chambers, we'll discover how ancient wisdom about preparation and abundance continues to speak to our modern world, offering lessons in resilience that remain as relevant today as they were 4,000 years ago. In the gentle pre-dawn hours along the Nile, when the first whispers of light touched the limestone walls of Memphis, the ancient Egyptian granaries stood as monuments to humanity's most profound understanding of abundance and scarcity. These vast storage complexes, rising like temples against the desert sky, embodied something far more sacred than mere economic planning. They represented the pharaonic vision of divine stewardship, where the earthly ruler served as the god's appointed guardian of prosperity, ensuring that the rhythm of plenty would never be broken by the inevitable seasons of want. The sacred economics of abundance in ancient Egypt emerged from a worldview that saw no separation between the spiritual and material realms. To the pharaoh and his administrators, the grain that flowed into royal granaries was not simply a commodity to be hoarded or traded, but a divine trust placed in human hands. This understanding shaped every aspect of the storage system, from the religious ceremonies that blessed each harvest to the careful calculations that determined distribution during lean years. The pharaoh's role as the earthly manifestation of divine providence meant that ensuring food security was not merely a practical concern, but a cosmic obligation woven into the very fabric of Ma'at, the universal order that governed all existence. Archaeological evidence from the great granary complexes at Saqqara and Giza reveals how this sacred understanding translated into architectural reality. These were not simple warehouses, but carefully designed spaces that reflected the Egyptians' deep reverence for the life-sustaining power of grain. The massive stone walls, rising in geometric precision from the desert floor, created cool, shadowed interiors where millions of bushels of wheat and barley rested in peaceful abundance. Hieroglyphic inscriptions carved into the walls spoke of eternal prosperity, promising that the pharaoh's divine authority would ensure that the granaries would never empty, that the people would never know hunger. The religious foundation of the grain storage system can be traced through the evolution of pharaonic ideology from the early dynastic period through the Old Kingdom. Initially, local rulers maintained their own storage facilities, but as the concept of divine kingship developed, so too did the understanding that grain reserves were a sacred responsibility that belonged ultimately to the pharaoh as the god's representative on earth. This theological framework transformed what might have been merely practical storage into a spiritual practice, where the accumulation and careful distribution of grain became acts of worship, expressions of the pharaoh's role as the provider for his people. Priestly oversight of these storage facilities reflected this sacred dimension. Temple complexes throughout Egypt incorporated granaries into their architectural plans, creating spaces where religious ritual and economic function intertwined seamlessly. Priests performed elaborate blessing ceremonies over newly stored grain, invoking the protection of Renenutet, the cobra goddess of harvest and nourishment, and ensuring that the stored abundance would remain pure and life-giving. These rituals, conducted in the quiet hours before dawn, filled the granary chambers with the gentle sound of chanted prayers and the sweet scent of burning incense, transforming mundane storage into acts of devotion. The administrative perspective reveals the practical challenges of maintaining this sacred trust. Royal scribes, working by the flickering light of oil lamps, meticulously recorded every measure of grain that entered the royal stores. Their papyrus records, preserved in the dry desert air, tell stories of careful calculation and constant vigilance, of men who understood that their mathematical precision served not just the pharaoh's administration, but the cosmic order itself. These scribes developed sophisticated systems for tracking grain quality, monitoring storage conditions, and predicting future needs, all while maintaining the religious framework that gave their work its deeper meaning. From the perspective of common people, the pharaoh's granaries represented security made manifest. Farmers delivering their harvest tribute to these massive complexes could see their grain disappearing into chambers that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadowed depths, knowing that this abundance would return to them in times of need. The sight of these granaries, with their thick walls and carefully guarded entrances, provided a tangible reminder of the pharaoh's promise to protect his people from the uncertainties of flood and famine. In the gentle evening light, as workers completed their daily tasks and prepared for rest, the granaries stood as silent guardians of community security, their presence as comforting as the rhythm of the Nile itself. This sacred economics of abundance created a unique synthesis of spiritual belief and practical administration that would influence Egyptian civilization for millennia. The pharaonic grain reserve system represented far more than economic planning. It embodied the ancient Egyptian understanding that true prosperity required both divine blessing and human wisdom, both spiritual devotion and careful preparation. In the quiet hours before sleep, as the desert wind whispered through the granary walls and the stored grain settled with gentle sounds into its resting places, the system stood as a testament to humanity's capacity to create institutions that served both practical needs and spiritual aspirations, ensuring that abundance would flow like the eternal Nile through generations yet to come. The architecture of these ancient granaries reveals a profound understanding of both practical necessity and symbolic meaning, where massive limestone blocks were carefully arranged to create spaces that would preserve grain across seasons and years. In the gentle morning light that filtered through the Nile Valley, these structures rose from the desert floor like monuments to human foresight. Their thick walls, designed to maintain the cool, stable temperatures essential for long-term grain storage. The builders of these facilities understood that preserving abundance required more than simply constructing large containers. It demanded a sophisticated integration of engineering principles, climate knowledge, and architectural innovation that would serve communities for generations. The design principles underlying these granaries reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom about the challenges of preservation in Egypt's demanding climate. The massive stone walls, often 3 to 4 cubits thick, provided natural insulation against the extreme temperature fluctuations that could spoil stored grain. Builders carefully oriented these structures to minimize exposure to the harsh western sun, while maximizing the cooling effects of prevailing northern winds. The entrances were positioned to create cross-ventilation patterns that would prevent the accumulation of moisture, while small windows, placed high in the walls, allowed air circulation without compromising security or temperature control. Archaeological evidence from sites like the Ramesseum reveals the extraordinary sophistication of these preservation techniques. The granary complex at this mortuary temple of Ramesses II demonstrates how storage facilities were integrated into larger architectural programs, with 17 separate chambers arranged in parallel rows, each designed with slightly sloping floors that would facilitate both loading and the removal of grain. The walls of these chambers show evidence of careful plastering with a mixture that included chaff and other organic materials, creating surfaces that would absorb excess moisture while preventing the growth of mold and other destructive organisms. The ventilation systems developed for these granaries represent remarkable innovations in climate control technology. Builders created networks of small shafts and channels within the walls themselves, allowing air to circulate through the stored grain without creating drafts that might carry away valuable product. These systems were often enhanced with carefully positioned openings that could be sealed during sandstorms or periods of high humidity, giving granary administrators precise control over the storage environment. The gentle movement of air through these channels created a subtle but constant circulation that prevented the stagnation that could lead to spoilage. Regional variations in granary design reflected local environmental conditions and available materials, yet all shared common principles of preservation and security. In the Delta region, where humidity levels were higher due to proximity to the Mediterranean, granaries were built with additional drainage systems and elevated floors that prevented ground moisture from affecting stored grain. The limestone used in these northern facilities was often selected for its particular porosity, allowing walls to breathe while maintaining structural integrity. In Upper Egypt, where the climate was drier but temperature extremes more severe, builders focused on thermal mass and insulation, creating structures that could maintain stable internal temperatures even during the hottest days of summer. The integration of these storage facilities into temple and palace complexes reveals how economic function was seamlessly woven into the broader fabric of Egyptian institutional life. At Deir el-Medina, the village that housed workers building royal tombs, granaries were positioned to serve both practical and ceremonial functions, with storage chambers accessible to administrators while remaining symbolically connected to the sacred spaces where priests performed rituals, ensuring continued abundance. The careful placement of these facilities within larger architectural programs demonstrates how storage was understood, not merely as a practical necessity, but as an integral component of the cosmic order that sustained Egyptian civilization. The construction techniques employed in these granaries show remarkable consistency across different periods and regions, suggesting the existence of specialized knowledge traditions passed down through generations of builders. Master craftsmen developed standardized methods for creating the curved corners that would prevent grain from accumulating in spaces where it might spoil, while also perfecting the techniques for creating smooth interior surfaces that would facilitate easy loading and unloading. The precision of these construction methods, evident in the careful fitting of stone blocks and the uniform thickness of wall sections, reflects the high value placed on creating storage facilities that would function reliably for decades or even centuries. The gentle scratch of reed pens against papyrus created a meditative rhythm that echoed through the quiet chambers of pharaonic granaries, where scribes worked by the warm glow of oil lamps, their movements as precise and deliberate as the mathematical principles that governed their sacred craft. In these peaceful spaces, far from the bustling activity of harvest fields and distribution centers, the ancient Egyptian scribal tradition reached one of its most sophisticated expressions through the development of standardized measurement systems that would ensure the accurate recording and management of grain reserves across the vast expanse of the Nile Valley. The evolution of Egyptian measurement science began in the earliest dynastic periods, when local administrators recognized that effective grain management required more than simple abundance. It demanded precision, consistency, and the ability to calculate reserves with mathematical certainty. The development of the Hecate, the fundamental unit of grain measurement, represented a profound advancement in economic administration, creating a standardized system that could be understood and applied from the delta marshlands to the granite quarries of Aswan. This unit, equivalent to approximately 4.8 liters in modern measurements, became the foundation upon which the entire granary system operated, its consistent application ensuring that a scribe in Memphis could understand exactly the quantities recorded by his counterpart in Thebes. Within the quiet sanctuaries of scribal schools, young men spent years mastering the intricate art of measurement and calculation, their training encompassing not merely the mechanical aspects of counting and recording, but the deeper philosophical understanding of their role as guardians of abundance. These students learned to handle the smooth wooden measuring vessels with reverence, understanding that each calculation they performed contributed to the security and prosperity of the entire kingdom. The curriculum included the mastery of fractions, essential for precise grain measurement, and the complex calculations required to determine storage capacity, spoilage rates, and optimal distribution schedules. The physical tools of measurement themselves reflected the sophistication of Egyptian mathematical thinking. Measuring vessels were crafted with meticulous attention to accuracy, their interiors smoothed and calibrated to ensure consistent results. These containers, often made from fired clay or carved stone, were regularly inspected and recalibrated to maintain their precision, with master craftsmen responsible for creating new vessels that matched established standards. The vessels were arranged in scribal chambers with geometric precision, each size and type occupying its designated position in a system that minimized error and maximized efficiency. The papyrus records that emerged from these careful measurements represent some of the most detailed economic documentation from the ancient world. Scribes developed sophisticated notation systems that could capture not only quantities, but also quality assessments, storage locations, and temporal information about when grain was received and distributed. These records, written in hieratic script for speed and efficiency, included detailed calculations of reserve levels, projected consumption rates, and estimates of how long stored grain might sustain the population during various crisis scenarios. The training of granary scribes required mastery of multiple mathematical concepts that modern scholars continue to study with admiration. These ancient calculators developed methods for determining the volume of irregularly shaped storage chambers, techniques for calculating spoilage rates under different climatic conditions, and systems for projecting future needs based on population estimates and historical consumption patterns. Their work required not only mathematical skill, but also deep understanding of agricultural cycles, weather patterns, and the complex social dynamics that influenced grain distribution. Regional variations in measurement practices reflected the adaptive nature of Egyptian administration, with local scribes developing specialized techniques suited to their particular environments and challenges. In the Delta region, where humidity posed constant threats to stored grain, scribes developed detailed protocols for monitoring moisture levels and calculating adjusted storage periods. In Upper Egypt, where the climate was more predictable but transport distances greater, scribes focused on optimizing distribution schedules and calculating transport costs with remarkable precision. The integration of measurement systems with religious and administrative hierarchies created a network of accountability that ensured accuracy while maintaining the sacred character of the work. Senior scribes served as both technical supervisors and spiritual guides, teaching younger colleagues that their mathematical precision served not merely administrative efficiency, but the divine order of Mayat itself. This integration of practical skill with spiritual purpose created a professional culture that valued accuracy, integrity, and dedication to the collective welfare. The legacy of Egyptian measurement science extended far beyond the granary walls, influencing architectural projects, engineering works, and commercial transactions throughout the ancient world. The precision and consistency of Egyptian mathematical methods provided a foundation for economic development that supported one of history's most enduring civilizations, demonstrating how careful attention to measurement and calculation could create systems of remarkable stability and effectiveness across centuries of changing political and social conditions. The gentle rhythm of Egypt's agricultural year created a profound harmony between human activity and natural cycles, a rhythm that found its most peaceful expression in the careful choreography of harvest and storage. As the Nile's waters receded each year, revealing the rich, dark silt that would nurture the coming harvest, an ancient dance began, one that had been perfected over millennia of patient observation and quiet refinement. The harvest season arrived with the soft whisper of wind through ripening grain, a sound that carried across the delta and up the Nile Valley like a gentle summons to collective action. In the pre-dawn darkness, before the sun's heat became too intense, workers would gather in the fields, their movements unhurried but purposeful. The cutting of grain was not merely an agricultural task, but a sacred act, one that connected the earthly abundance to divine provision. Each stroke of the sickle was guided by traditions passed down through generations, creating a meditative rhythm that transformed labor into something approaching prayer. The logistics of moving grain from countless fields to the great granaries required a coordination that spoke to the profound organizational wisdom of ancient Egypt. Long processions of workers carrying baskets woven from palm fronds, would form natural pathways across the landscape. These human rivers of abundance moved with an almost musical cadence, the soft shuffle of feet on packed earth, creating a percussion that accompanied the harvest song. The sight of these processions, stretching across the golden fields in the gentle light of early morning, represented one of humanity's earliest achievements in large-scale resource management. The Nile itself served as the great highway for this movement of grain, its broad waters carrying specially designed barges that moved with stately grace between the harvest fields and the storage centers. These vessels, their holds carefully lined with woven mats to protect the precious cargo, represented a marriage of practical engineering and aesthetic beauty. The sight of a grain barge moving slowly downstream, its crew working in quiet synchronization, embodied the peaceful efficiency that characterized the entire system. The gentle lapping of water against the hull, the soft calls of the crew, and the whisper of wind in the rigging created a symphony of abundance that spoke to the soul. At the granaries themselves, the arrival of each harvest load was met with ceremonies that honored both the practical and spiritual dimensions of food storage. Scribes would emerge from their cool chambers, their reed pens and measuring vessels, ready to record each contribution to the royal reserves. The process of measurement and recording took on an almost ritualistic quality, each grain counted and weighed with the precision that befitted a sacred trust. The gentle sound of grain pouring into the great storage chambers created a music of security, a reassuring whisper that spoke of preparation and foresight. The seasonal nature of this work created communities bound together by shared purpose and mutual dependence. During the harvest months, entire villages would organize themselves around the rhythm of collection and transport. Children would help their parents in the fields, learning through participation the ancient skills that sustained civilization. Elderly workers, their movements perhaps slower, but their knowledge invaluable, would guide the younger generation in the subtle arts of grain handling and storage. These intergenerational connections, forged in the peaceful labor of harvest time, created social bonds that strengthened the entire community. The coordination between agricultural and storage systems required a communication network that operated with remarkable efficiency despite the technological limitations of the ancient world. Signal fires on hilltops would announce the progress of harvests in distant regions, while messenger boats carried detailed reports between nome administrators and central authorities. This information flow, conducted with the quiet urgency of vital business, ensured that storage facilities could prepare for incoming grain and that transport resources could be allocated where most needed. The workers who specialized in grain transport developed their own professional culture, complete with traditional songs, specialized techniques, and a deep pride in their essential role. The grain porters, who carried the heavy baskets from field to storage, moved with a measured gait that conserved energy while maintaining steady progress. Their work songs, passed down through generations, helped coordinate movement and made the labor less burdensome. These melodies, heard across the harvest fields at dawn and dusk, became part of the seasonal soundtrack that marked the rhythm of Egyptian life. As the harvest season progressed, the great granaries would slowly fill with the golden abundance of the year's crop. The sight of these massive structures, their chambers gradually swelling with grain, provided a profound sense of security that permeated the entire society. The knowledge that careful preparation had been made for the uncertain future created a collective peace of mind that allowed Egyptian civilization to flourish with remarkable stability. This harvest rhythm, repeated year after year across the centuries, created a foundation of security that enabled the flowering of art, architecture, and learning that we associate with ancient Egypt. The quiet efficiency of this seasonal choreography, the peaceful coordination of human effort with natural cycles, and the deep satisfaction of work that ensured collective survival created a model of economic organization that speaks across the millennia to our own need for security and preparation. The ancient Egyptians possessed a profound understanding of time's cyclical nature, recognizing that abundance and scarcity moved in eternal rhythms like the Nile's own floods. This wisdom, carved into temple walls and recorded on countless papyri, spoke of lean years as inevitable visitors that required not panic, but patient preparation. In the quiet halls of Memphis Granaries, where moonlight filtered through high windows onto carefully measured stores, administrators contemplated the delicate balance between plenty and want with the same reverence they might offer to the gods themselves. The pharaonic approach to disaster preparedness emerged from a deeply spiritual understanding of royal responsibility. The king, as divine intermediary between heaven and earth, bore the sacred obligation to ensure his people's survival through whatever trials the gods might send. This was not merely political necessity, but cosmic duty, woven into the very fabric of Ma'at, the divine order that governed all existence. Temple inscriptions from the reign of Amenemhet III speak of the pharaoh's sleepless vigil over the kingdom's abundance, describing how he would rise before dawn to review granary reports, his concern for the people's welfare as constant as the North Star. Archaeological evidence from Lahun reveals the sophisticated early warning systems that developed during the Middle Kingdom. Scribes stationed throughout the realm monitored not only harvest yields, but also the subtle signs that preceded difficult years: the color of the Nile's waters, the behavior of migrating birds, the thickness of grain stalks in temple gardens. These observations, recorded with meticulous care on papyrus scrolls, created a network of knowledge that allowed administrators to anticipate shortages months or even years in advance. The gentle scratch of reed pens working by lamplight in provincial offices represented humanity's earliest systematic approach to economic forecasting. The psychology of scarcity management in ancient Egypt reflected a remarkable sophistication in understanding human behavior during crisis. Rather than waiting for disaster to strike, the system operated on principles of gradual adjustment and transparent communication. When granary reports indicated potential shortages, local administrators would begin subtle modifications to distribution patterns, reducing portions incrementally while maintaining the dignity of recipients. This approach, documented in administrative papyri from Deir el-Medina, prevented the panic that often accompanied sudden rationing while allowing communities to adapt psychologically to changing circumstances. Religious texts from the Temple of Edfu describe the spiritual dimensions of disaster preparation, portraying lean years not as divine punishment, but as tests of collective wisdom and mutual care. Priests would conduct special ceremonies before opening emergency reserves, blessing both the grain and those who would receive it. These rituals, performed in the pre-dawn darkness of temple courtyards, created a sense of sacred purpose around even the most practical aspects of survival. The community's response to scarcity became an expression of their highest values, transforming necessity into an opportunity for spiritual growth. The administrative records from Hekanakta's archive provide intimate glimpses into how individual families navigated uncertain times within the broader system. This Middle Kingdom farmer's correspondence reveals the careful calculations that ordinary people made when facing potential shortages: which fields to plant, which animals to keep, how to balance immediate needs against future security. His letters, written on scraps of papyrus in the quiet hours after field work, demonstrate how the pharaonic system's wisdom filtered down to the most personal levels of decision-making. Regional variations in disaster response reflected the kingdom's understanding that different areas faced different challenges. The Delta region, with its reliable floods and fertile soil, maintained smaller reserves, but developed sophisticated networks for rapid grain movement. Upper Egypt, more vulnerable to flood variations, invested heavily in long-term storage and developed alternative food sources. The Fayum region, with its unique geography, created innovative systems combining natural lake storage with artificial reservoirs. These adaptations, documented in Nome administrative records, show how central principles could be modified to address local realities while maintaining system-wide coherence. The human stories embedded within these institutional frameworks reveal the profound impact of thoughtful disaster preparation on daily life. Families could sleep peacefully, knowing that their community's survival did not depend on a single season's harvest. Children grew up understanding that abundance was not guaranteed, but that human wisdom and divine providence, working together, could navigate even the most challenging circumstances. This sense of security, built through generations of careful planning, created a foundation of trust that strengthened the entire social fabric. The distribution networks that carried grain from the great pharaonic granaries to the people of Egypt flowed like the Nile itself, following ancient channels carved by necessity and wisdom. In the pre-dawn darkness, before the heat of day made travel uncomfortable, boats would begin their gentle journey along the river's placid surface, their holds heavy with the golden treasure that sustained civilization. The sight of these vessels, moving with stately purpose through the morning mist, embodied the quiet efficiency of a system designed not for spectacle, but for the fundamental human need of sustenance. The hierarchical nature of these distribution networks reflected the ordered cosmos that Egyptians believed governed all existence. At the apex stood the royal granaries of Memphis and Thebes, their massive stores feeding not only the capital cities, but serving as the heart of a circulatory system that reached into every corner of the kingdom. From these central repositories, grain flowed outward through carefully maintained channels, each level of distribution overseen by officials whose understanding of local needs was as precise as their knowledge of central directives. The Nome administrators, those patient guardians of regional stability, coordinated with temple priests and local governors to ensure that abundance reached even the most remote villages along the Nile's banks. The physical infrastructure supporting this distribution revealed the sophisticated engineering that lay beneath Egypt's apparent simplicity. Canal systems, many dating to the earliest dynasties, carried grain barges through networks of waterways that supplemented the great river's natural flow. These artificial channels, maintained by generations of workers who understood their vital importance, created redundancy in the system that protected against the inevitable disruptions of flood and drought. The gentle lapping of water against stone embankments, the soft creak of wooden vessels, and the quiet voices of bargemen calling to one another across the water created a soundscape of peaceful commerce that had remained unchanged for millennia. Within the cities themselves, distribution centers operated with the rhythmic precision of well-choreographed ceremonies. the great courtyard of the Ramesseum, where grain was distributed to the workers who built and maintained the pharaoh's memorial temple, exemplified the integration of practical necessity with sacred purpose. Here, as dawn light filtered through the columns, scribes would arrange their measuring vessels in careful rows, while workers formed orderly lines that spoke to both efficient organization and mutual respect. The absence of chaos or desperation in these scenes reflected not merely good administration, but a deeper cultural understanding that food distribution was a sacred act, a manifestation of May that required dignity and order. The role of temples in this distribution network added layers of meaning to what might otherwise have been merely economic transactions. Temple complexes served as both storage facilities and distribution centers, their priests functioning as intermediaries between divine abundance and human need. The Temple of Karnak, with its vast granaries and systematic distribution protocols, demonstrated how religious institutions seamlessly integrated spiritual and practical concerns. The gentle chanting of morning prayers, mixed with the soft sound of grain being measured and distributed, creating an atmosphere where the sacred and mundane merged into a single, peaceful whole. Regional variations in distribution methods reflected the adaptive wisdom of a system that recognized local conditions while maintaining central coordination. In the Delta region, where the Nile's many branches created a complex network of waterways, distribution followed patterns that took advantage of seasonal flooding to reach communities that might otherwise be isolated. The Fayum, with its unique geography and agricultural systems, developed specialized distribution networks that coordinated with the region's distinctive irrigation systems. These variations were not departures from central planning, but rather expressions of a system flexible enough to accommodate local needs while maintaining overall coherence. The integration of military and civilian distribution networks revealed the comprehensive nature of pharaonic planning. Garrison towns along Egypt's borders received regular grain shipments that ensured the loyalty and effectiveness of frontier forces, while the distribution routes themselves were protected by military units that understood their vital importance to national security. This dual-purpose infrastructure created redundancy and mutual support that strengthened both systems, demonstrating the holistic thinking that characterized Egyptian institutional design. The quiet efficiency of these distribution networks extended beyond mere logistics to encompass the social relationships that made such systems possible. Local officials who oversaw distribution in their communities were not distant bureaucrats, but neighbors who understood the specific needs of families and individuals. The grain distributor, who knew which households included elderly members requiring softer grains, or which families had young children with particular nutritional needs, embodied the human dimension of institutional care. These personal relationships, maintained through generations of service, created bonds of trust that made the entire system more resilient and effective. As evening approached and the day's distribution activities drew to a close, the networks that had carried grain throughout Egypt settled into the peaceful rhythm of preparation for tomorrow's needs. Boats were secured at their moorings, distribution centers were cleaned and organized for the next day's work, and scribes completed their careful records by the light of oil lamps. The quiet satisfaction of work well done, of communities fed and systems maintained, created an atmosphere of contentment that spoke to the deeper purposes these networks served. In this gentle conclusion to each day's activities, one could sense the timeless rhythm of human institutions designed not for glory, but for the fundamental task of ensuring that abundance, when it existed, reached those who needed it most. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the desert air still held the coolness of night, the granary workers of ancient Egypt would begin their daily rituals of abundance. These were not merely laborers moving grain from one place to another, but guardians of a sacred trust that connected the divine promises of pharaonic rule to the most fundamental human need for sustenance. Their work carried the weight of cosmic responsibility, yet it unfolded with the gentle rhythm of well-practiced routine. Each movement informed by generations of accumulated wisdom about the delicate balance between plenty and want. The granary complexes themselves had evolved into small communities, complete worlds unto themselves where families lived and worked within the protective embrace of stored abundance. Children grew up playing in the shadows of massive stone walls, their laughter echoing through corridors lined with carefully maintained storage chambers. These young ones learned early the sacred mathematics of survival, watching their parents measure and record with the precision that meant the difference between community prosperity and collective hardship. The granaries were not cold institutional spaces, but living environments where human relationships flourished under the shared understanding that their work ensured the survival of the broader community. Within these communities, specialized roles had developed over centuries, each position carrying its own dignity and responsibility. The master granary keeper, often a man of considerable learning who could read the complex hieroglyphic records and understand the intricate calculations of storage capacity, held a position of respect comparable to that of temple priests. His knowledge encompassed not only the practical aspects of grain preservation, but also the religious significance of abundance, the proper rituals for blessing stored grain, and the delicate protocols for distribution during times of scarcity. Below him worked the measurers, skilled in the precise use of the various Hecat vessels and other standardized containers that ensured fair distribution and accurate record keeping. The women who worked in the granaries often specialized in the careful inspection of stored grain, their trained eyes capable of detecting the earliest signs of spoilage or pest infestation. Their work required a deep understanding of the subtle changes in grain quality over time, knowledge passed down through generations of mothers and daughters who had dedicated their lives to maintaining the community's food security. They moved through the storage chambers with quiet efficiency, their presence a reassuring constant in the endless cycle of preservation and distribution that kept Egyptian civilization functioning smoothly. The social relationships that developed within these granary communities reflected the broader Egyptian understanding of collective responsibility and mutual dependence. Workers who had spent their lives ensuring abundance for others were themselves supported by the community they served. Their own families guaranteed access to the stored grain during times of personal hardship. This created a web of reciprocal obligation that extended far beyond simple employment, binding individuals to their communities through shared participation in the sacred work of survival preparation. During the evening hours, when the day's work was complete and the granaries settled into peaceful quiet, families would gather in the courtyards adjacent to the storage facilities. These were moments of profound contentment, when the physical reality of abundance surrounded them and the abstract concept of food security became tangible in the form of well-maintained storage chambers filled with carefully preserved grain. Children would listen to stories told by their elders, tales that often incorporated the wisdom of proper storage techniques and the moral obligations that came with managing community resources. The cultural meaning of this work extended far beyond its practical necessity, becoming integrated into the broader Egyptian understanding of cosmic order and human responsibility. To work in the granaries was to participate directly in the maintenance of Mayat, the divine principle of balance and justice that governed both earthly and celestial affairs. The careful measurement of grain, the meticulous record-keeping, and the fair distribution during times of need were not merely administrative tasks, but sacred duties that connected individual workers to the fundamental forces that sustained Egyptian civilization. The psychological comfort that came from this work was profound and lasting. Unlike many forms of labor that produced temporary results, the maintenance of grain reserves created a sense of permanent security that extended across generations. Granary workers could see the direct connection between their daily efforts and the long-term survival of their communities, a relationship that provided deep satisfaction and a sense of meaningful participation in something larger than individual existence. As the millennia passed and Egyptian civilization evolved through its various dynastic periods, the human face of the granary system remained remarkably consistent. The same quiet dignity, the same careful attention to detail, and the same deep understanding of collective responsibility continued to characterize those who dedicated their lives to maintaining abundance for others. Their legacy lives on in the archaeological remains of their carefully constructed storage facilities and in the papyrus records that document their meticulous attention to the sacred mathematics of survival, testament to the enduring power of human cooperation in the face of uncertainty. As we draw our contemplation of the Pharaonic grain reserve system to its gentle close, we find ourselves surrounded by the profound wisdom of a civilization that understood the sacred rhythm of abundance and scarcity. The ancient Egyptians, in their quiet genius, created not merely storage facilities, but temples to human foresight, where the golden grain lay sleeping in cool limestone chambers, waiting patiently through the seasons like a promise whispered across millennia. The granaries of Memphis and Thebes, their massive walls, now softened by time and desert winds, speak to us still of a deeper understanding that true security comes not from the absence of uncertainty, but from the peaceful preparation for it. In those shadowed corridors where scribes once worked by lamplight, calculating reserves with the devotion of priests, we glimpse something timeless, the human capacity to think beyond the immediate moment, to plan with love for generations yet unborn. The pharaonic system reveals itself as more than economic policy. It was a meditation on stewardship, a recognition that abundance shared becomes abundance multiplied. The grain that flowed like liquid gold from harvest fields into storage chambers carried with it the accumulated wisdom of the Nile's ancient rhythm, teaching us that preparation and providence walk hand in hand through history's long corridors. As we let this knowledge settle into our consciousness, like silt depositing along the riverbank, we can feel the profound peace that comes from understanding how human ingenuity, when guided by wisdom and compassion, creates systems that endure. The gentle efficiency of those ancient distribution networks, the quiet dignity of workers maintaining reserves, the careful calculations of scribes ensuring fairness, all of this speaks to something eternal in the human spirit. Let your mind drift now like a grain barge moving slowly along the moonlit Nile, carrying its precious cargo through the peaceful darkness. Feel the weight of ancient wisdom settling over you like the cool shadows of granary walls, protecting and nurturing. The whispered calculations of long-dead scribes become a lullaby, their careful measurements a rhythm that soothes the soul. In the eternal silence of desert granaries, where abundance once waited patiently for times of need, we find the deepest lesson, that true peace comes from the knowledge that human wisdom, carefully preserved and lovingly shared, creates security that transcends time itself. Rest now in this understanding, as the ancient grain once rested in its stone chambers, peaceful and protected, dreaming of the sustenance it would provide.